Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this video is just advice to aspiring web developers, aspiring full stack developers, just from what I've learned from being in that process of being a aspiring web developer, full stack developer. Okay, so one, I'm still in the process of going through a boot camp. Now, that's probably the first bit of advice I'm going to talk about. It's like, a lot of people have this question: should I go through a boot camp? Is it worth it? Whatnot. Now, before I started my boot camp at General Assembly, which if you do go through a boot camp, I'd recommend them. I found my experience with them to be great. I went through the remote program, and the way it's delivered is very unique. Someone who, before going into development, was a trainer in the financial industry for 11 years, who did online training, in-person training. The way General Assembly does it is very innovative. I was very impressed with the execution. But basically, about 3 or 4 months before I joined boot camp in General Assembly, I did a lot of my own sort of self-teaching because I wanted to see. And in hindsight, I was able to actually teach myself quite a bit during that period of time. Okay, you don't realize sometimes how much you've learned until you're in a situation where you need that information. Okay, but looking back on it, one of the challenges of teaching yourself, okay, is discipline. Because one of the things I know I did was I wanted to learn a little bit of everything. Okay, so I would learn a lot of different things, and I know that you're supposed to just focus and specialize and whatnot. But I'm a curious learner. I like learning. So I learned a lot of things, but my foundation was weak. And this is where the going to the boot camp gave me basically gave me a structured. It kind of forced me to kind of really reinforce those fundamentals, and I'm a lot stronger developer now for it. So basically, doing those coding exercises on websites like HackerRank and CodeGuru are really, really important. Is basically and then if you just don't have the discipline to do it, then yes, a boot camp is a great option. Or if you're someone who's really has never done anything with web design at all, you've never done any HTML or anything, then I would highly recommend a boot camp, because it's hard enough to learn it when you have had some experience building websites over the years and working with a lot of web applications. If you're doing it from scratch, the extra guidance is going to be useful, but it is intense. Okay, so when if you go to a full-time program and they tell you don't work during that time, don't work. It'll be worth it. You're going to really want to use every time that you have. Cool. Now, of course, the things you're going to need to learn are things like, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and you're going to want to be really, really hammering those fundamentals. Okay, so basically doing lots of exercises, I watched a lot of videos, and I felt I got a lot of payoff from that, watching different people do things different ways. And also, another thing that I think helped a lot was watching videos, conceptual videos, not just saying, okay, how do I do this slider or how do I do this card, but knowing a little bit about the history of JavaScript and sort of how we got from, JavaScript as this minor scripting language in the browser to Node.js and being sort of the dominant language that it is today. And just kind of learning a lot of sort of the history of how the frameworks and technologies that are used today became the technologies we use today. One, it makes you sound a lot more authentic when you talk to potential employers or colleagues or whatnot, because you're able to talk about the industry and sound like you're from the industry. Okay, one thing we used to tell people in the financial industry when we train them is that if you don't know the history of your industry, it's not your industry. The reason being is that you won't be able to really truly communicate in a way that gives you authenticity. And one of the things that opens doors for you is authenticity, being able to speak with that authority and authenticity. So learning that background is going to be valuable in the job search, and your ability to feel confident during a job search, which is always one of the biggest challenges for people in a job search. Okay, they may feel like they've conquered several challenges, but you really don't know that you know until you have to do it. This is what's referred to as imposter syndrome. You're always going to feel like you don't know everything, because literally there's so much to learn in programming. One, just mastering a language is a daunting and never-ending task. But then there's several different frameworks and libraries in every language that are oftentimes almost like languages unto themselves that require their own sort of dedicated study. So you can't master everything, but there are certain things you do really need to learn. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and really kind of master that sort of plain vanilla front end piece. But then you really need to go on the back end. Okay, you need to learn about the different types of databases, at least one SQL database in Mongo, whether it's Postgres, MySQL, any kind of SQL database. Just get familiar with the idea of SQL and how to incorporate that with a backend framework. Okay, and the backend with that, and then what does that mean? So when I say front end, I mean the part that the browser renders. So if you're using Chrome, that's the part that Chrome takes from a server and says, okay, I'm going to render this on the screen. Versus the back end, which is, hey, there's some server somewhere that has all the website files, and they're going to do all this other work there. And then they're going to send something to my Chrome browser that renders on the screen. So that back-end work is that there's some server out there, and they're using some sort of programming language, which could be JavaScript or some other language, Python, Ruby, Go, you name it. There's a server-side framework for it. But you are going to want to learn a few backend frameworks. Definitely want to learn the ones in JavaScript. Since you've already learned JavaScript for the front end, you might as well learn the JavaScript backend, which means learning what's called Node.js and at least Express. Although there are other frameworks in the Node universe, there's a lot of them. But you're going to want to learn how to work with Express and Node and MongoDB. But then you're going to want to learn another backend framework in some other language. Now, of course, sort of the two most proliferated ones outside of JavaScript are probably, the three are going to be Python with Django, Ruby with Ruby on Rails, and then C# with the .NET framework. C# with the .NET framework is going to be used in much larger enterprises, and it's a much more sort of larger scale environment. So just be prepared for the learning curve. Python and Ruby are both pretty easy languages to learn. Their syntax is very Englishy in the sense that, it's easy to read. So those are both good to learn. But once you learn one or two languages, the concepts kind of repeat, so it becomes easy to learn another and another and another. And it doesn't hurt to kind of see the differences between the different languages. You can see the videos on my YouTube channel where I actually go over many different languages to kind of give you the core concepts over and over again so you can see those differences. But basically, that's what you need to learn so far. So you need to learn the front end piece, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and get really good at it. You really want that solid and nice and strong. Then you need to explore the back end, so learn some databases, Express and Node on the JavaScript end, and at least one other language and some other backend framework. And then you need to understand the front end. Which, what I mean when I say go back to the front end, we're talking about what's called a single page application. A single page application is just essentially what you're doing is, instead of building a website with several different HTML files that each render separately as you click on different links, you're creating sort of one big website that loads once. It loads once in the browser. So basically, it takes a little longer to load up front, but then the whole user experience going forward is much simpler because everything is inside that one application. And this is generally used using frameworks like Angular, React, and Vue. You should learn the basics of all three, but choose one that you really want to specialize in. And then if you want to go a step further, you can learn about web components and web component compilers, such as Svelte and Stencil. And all these you can find videos just to give you the basics of on my YouTube channel. But now going back to the back end, when I say learn Express, learn some backend framework, there's a lot of pieces you need to be aware of. Okay, so the pieces that you need to be aware of and want to kind of put on a checklist and make sure you learned is routing. So basically, when your backend server receives a request from somebody typing in a website, where does that information go? What do we send back to the user? That's routing. Okay, authentication. How do we and how do users sign up and log in? And how do we keep track of that they're still logged in so that we don't have to log in every few seconds? Which could be done through like JSON Web Tokens, through sessions, through cookies, many different ways. And basically, and then also interacting with the database. How do I go into the database and control the information going in there and out there? And then learning what's called the Model View Controller project framework, or I'm not sure about what the exact word I'm looking for is, but Model View Container just means breaking up your project into 3 categories. So learn those things, and or learn everything I just talked about, and you'll be on the start to becoming a developer, whether you do it through a bootcamp or on your own. Have a great day. Enjoy.